This is a story of two very different men. One was meant to take down drug traffickers.
He's gone from being a defender of the law to a defendant in a multi-million-dollar drug case. Mark Standen is a 30-year veteran of the force and a senior investigator with the New South Wales Crime Commission.
Standen was working at the top of international drug syndicates. The sums involved are eye-watering.
The other man, a former world champion kickboxer, who police claimed was planning a massive drug import, just like Mark Standen.
I feel I was arrested as a means to cover up the full extent of Mark Standen's corruption.
For 16 years, Adam Watt has been investigating his nemesis, Mark Standen. What he's uncovered goes to the heart of justice in New South Wales.
From the moment I was arrested, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't give up until the truth was told.
Mark Standen was the most senior crime fighter ever to be convicted of a drug import in Australia. At the time of his arrest, authorities were desperate to control the narrative.
This is an isolated incident of one person engaging in crime. I don't think that justifies a Royal Commission.
What we're about to show you is Standen's corruption was far more sinister and deeper than authorities ever let on.
When you're in this big dark hole that they were in, you can either apologise or you can dig the hole deeper. And it appears to me that all the Crime Commission ever wanted to do was dig the hole deeper.
Mark Standen says he's a wronged man. This is his first television interview.
Have you ever committed a crime at all?
No.
In an investigation spanning more than a decade, we can reveal that Mark Standen was engaged in many crimes. He protected criminals, sabotaged major investigations into organised crime, and is believed to have helped facilitate multiple drug imports.
The only way you can move forward and have some confidence that things will not happen again is if you absolutely investigate everything.
On a spring morning in 2008, Adam Watt went for his daily morning walk in Manly on Sydney's northern beaches, unaware that his life was about to change forever.
First thing I thought was, they've got the wrong guy. This is a big mistake.
Watt, just like Mark Standen, was charged with conspiracy to import and supply pseudoephedrine.
When I was finally given access to the fact sheet against me, or the so-called fact sheet against me, it read like I was Pablo Escobar.
In prison, Watt learned that he and former crime fighter Mark Standen were both accused of working with the same members of a huge Dutch drug syndicate. For Watt, this was a light bulb moment. He suspected the import he was charged with was for Standen and his criminal mates.
Probably there was no better place in the world than where I was held to uncover the full breadth of Mark Standen's criminality. In Pod 12 were the who's who of the criminal underworld.
Watt's inquiries came to an abrupt halt when a convicted murderer was led into his remand pod. Watt was attacked with a sandwich maker hidden in a pillowcase.
He kind of whiplashed into the back of my head. First blow knocked me out, second blow tore part of my ear off. I couldn't understand how a convicted murderer, deemed one of the most violent prisoners in New South Wales jail system, was placed in with inmates, presumed innocent, being held on remand.
When Watt returned from hospital, he says his defence brief, with all his evidence against Standen, had disappeared. The assault left him with a brain injury causing memory loss and epileptic fits. Despite all this, he continued his investigation. Watt obtained a tape recorder to keep a record of his conversations.
I didn't believe anybody would believe me of what I was hearing, what I was uncovering. I believe the import I'd been charged with and the import that Mark Standen had been charged with was one story. I believe that my import was destined for members of the syndicate which Mark Standen protected.
Watt believed there was one person who could prove his innocence and reveal the truth about other imports in which Standen was involved: Bill Janine. He was a flamboyant food importer based in Western Sydney who planned with Standen to use his business as a cover to import drugs. Janine was in the same prison and Watt was determined to talk to him.
Bill Janine was held in protection area. I was in the main area. I found out through the sweepers that Bill Janine would be walking to visits, the area for visits at a certain time. I managed to get myself a job as the oval sweeper.
Watt says Standen's co-accused opened up to him in several conversations which he taped.
The first thing he said was, "Yes, Adam, I know your name, I know who you are." And then he said to me straight out that he knew of Standen's other imports. Can you write a statement, or can I get you to sign something saying that you knew that Standen was bringing stuff in earlier?
Before 2007.
Yeah, exactly.
Just me.
And it was getting it taken by customs?
There's another guy at 5C who also says the same thing.
Yeah.
That he started well before 2007.
I wanted transparency, bring all that material out that would support my defence and also help me uncover how I got into this mess.
Janine continued talking to Watt about Standen.
What do you about Standen? He was dirty for fucking before January 2007.
They've got stuff on him, which the AP doesn't know about. The Crime Commission knows about it.
Yeah, but he was bringing imports behind people's backs. I'm telling you, they were using me. That's right, isn't it?
When I'm finished, I'm going to bring all that out.
Bill Janine told me that the reason he got involved with Mark Standen and James Kinch is because they had done previous imports and not been caught.
Bill Janine never followed through with his plan to tell all. He signed up as a witness with the New South Wales Crime Commission, one of the nation's most secretive crime-fighting bodies. Janine got a discount on his sentence and served 6 years for his part in the illicit drug import.
He promised to tell all he knew. He promised to lift the lid on it, but once he was sentenced, that was it. He never said another word.
What happens next reads like a Hollywood crime thriller. Almost 2 years after his arrest, Watt was released on bail and moved in with his mother. Soon after, police warned him he and his family's lives could be at risk. Somehow, prison authorities mistakenly gave his file with his home address to his attacker, who'd also been released from prison.
When I was told that he was coming to my place and to my parents' place, I really thought that maybe this is how it would end for me, and I felt absolute fear for my family. I felt like it was just another instance of pressure being applied to me to stop my investigation, to pull back and stop agitating for the truth to come out.
Adam Watt went into hiding. He kept a video diary because of his short-term memory loss.
How do I feel for my safety? I'm feeling more and more, I'm getting told everywhere which way I look that there's a safety issue for me. But what can I do?
Despite safety concerns, Watt continued visiting prisons, collecting intel and statements from inmates about Mark Standen. He says the Crime Commission was keen to know what evidence he had on Standen and convinced him to hand over his defence brief. The Commission's top lawyer, John Giorgiuti, told Watt he could do the work that Watt's lawyers weren't doing. Although this was an unusual offer, Four Corners is not suggesting Giorgiuti was doing anything illegal. Watt taped the meeting with Giorgiuti.
What we'll probably do is we'll put all this into a statement. Whatever happens, that statement is what you're going to give to your lawyers. Yeah. So they won't sit down with you. I won't do the work. They don't. It's legal aid. I understand.
Giorgiuti said he had no memory of this conversation, but anything he said would have been on instructions from the Crime Commission. In an effort to join the dots, Watt planned to go to Standen's Supreme Court trial every day.
It's the day Mark Standen's trial is set to commence. They've sworn the jury in and everything's ready to go.
I went to Mark Standen's trial for 5 months, nearly every day. I did so because I knew there'd be evidence there which had been withheld from me, but I also wanted the prosecuting authorities to know I wasn't going to roll over, I wasn't going to lie down, and I was there for the fight.
I first started filming with Adam Watt in 2011. Back then, he was only just starting to piece together what he believed was Standen's wider criminality. Watt has never publicly spoken before.
When I say I'm living the case, I really am living the case. This is my office. It's also my bedroom. What I do from here is I take as much material as I can, which I've acquired from all different sources, and I incorporate it into my Excel document here. I've been warned off by everybody in the legal fraternity not to take on the New South Wales Crime Commission. I mean, I'm not going to back down. The reason I'm taking on the New South Wales Crime Commission is that is where Standen worked.
16 years after his arrest, Watt is still investigating Mark Standen, despite suffering from increasing memory loss. He says he was dragged into the criminal conspiracy by a friend who was secretly a member of the Dutch drug syndicate.
I feel I was arrested as a means to cover up the full extent of Mark Standen's corruption.
In the eyes of the law, Adam Watt is neither guilty nor innocent. His co-accused was convicted of planning the import, and the judge described Watt as his trusted lieutenant. But Watt was declared unfit to stand trial due to his brain injury. This means a drug charge still hangs over his head. We've spoken to a person who says they took the fall for one of Standen's imports. Do you think potentially there are people that are collateral damage?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Standen wouldn't care. That's how these people survive. They do a lot of things at arm's length. People take a fall for them. People get tied up in a system they've got no control over.
From the moment I was arrested, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't give up until the truth was told. They put me through everything, unimaginable pain and suffering, but I'm not stopping.
14 years after his conviction, Mark Standen too claims he's a wronged man.
Have you ever committed a crime at all?
No.
So the crime you were convicted of, conspiracy to supply and import pseudoephedrine, just didn't happen?
There was a plan to do it, but I wasn't part of that plan.
Standen was released from prison last year, and this is the first TV interview he's ever given. He agreed to meet for a background chat only at this cafe on the New South Wales Central Coast. Afterwards, the mercurial Mark Standen agreed to an iPhone interview. How do you feel if you believe you're an innocent man? You must be bitter then.
No, it's just a fact of life. Very pragmatic about everything. It's done and dusted. I told them what happened as best as I knew at the time. That wasn't accepted by the unhappy jury.
I think he's a very good liar. I think he has a way about him of deceiving people in a convincing manner.
When Standen was under surveillance for the 2008 drug import, Nick Caldis was briefed by the AFP. At the time, he was Deputy Commissioner of the New South Wales Police. Caldis distrusted the Crime Commission after he and others were improperly investigated. Nor did he trust Standen.
I think there's always been question marks about him. I am aware that some very senior police, in fact, had doubts about him going back to 2003.
Standen was often broke despite earning more than $200,000 a year. He was borrowing money from friends and colleagues. The Crime Commission was told he'd taken money from the safe in his office, and on one occasion, Commission boss Philip Bradley personally paid for Standen's groceries so he could feed his family. Would that have sent warning bells to you, and what would you have done about it?
I think it definitely would have raised alarm bells, and you'd want to ask why. If you're simply living beyond your means, whether it's gambling or drugs or otherwise, sooner or later someone's going to come to you and say, we can fix your problem, here's a bucket of money, but you've got to do something bad for us.
Four Corners has seen a Crime Commission document that suggests Standen had a long-standing gambling problem. It's said that then AFP Commissioner Mick Kilty told Philip Bradley in 2007 that Standen had taken a redundancy from the AFP to discharge unmanageable gambling debts, and that Bradley had previously been cautioned about Standen's gambling problem by an earlier AFP Commissioner, Mick Palmer.
That's like putting a fox in charge of the chickens, right? It's a recipe for disaster, really.
Because they never did a vetting of him when they employed him. And that would be the first question. How the fuck could you employ someone like this? Look, we told you this was going to happen.
Philip Bradley told Four Corners he had plans to sack Standen, but agreed to hold off to let the investigation run its course. He said when he hired Standen, it wasn't known he'd ever had a gambling problem.
I was a casual weekend punter, a couple of $100 at most, and the story that was contrived around that was a suitably contrived story to provide some sort of a motive for the trial.
When Adam Watt wasn't attending Standen's trial, he was investigating some of the corrupt cops' sources. Standen's job was to recruit informants to provide intel about organised crime.
I discovered that Mark Standen's relationship with these human sources or informants was anything but above board.
The first informant Adam Watt learned about is notorious career criminal John Anderson, a drug trafficker who was also a suspected serial rapist and murderer. Standen's relationship with Anderson goes back decades.
He was an arsehole of the highest word. He was just a nasty piece of work. And Standen knew that.
So you didn't have a corrupt relationship with John Anderson?
No, I had a friendly relationship with him, but not a corrupt relationship.
Crime Commission boss Philip Bradley was aware that Standen had a relationship with John Anderson. A year before Standen's arrest, he was called to an urgent meeting where he learnt that Standen, his top investigator, was a drug trafficker. In a document written by Bradley after the meeting, he described AFP intelligence gathered on Standen. It includes information from John Anderson's wife. She said they have looked after Standen for years and that they found him a new home. Mark Standen had previously moved into their former home and they had provided financial support. Just on that, we've seen a document that suggests that you took money from John Anderson and you at one point even lived in his house. Is that right?
I didn't take any money from him, and for a brief period I stayed in a house that he was no longer renting.
Mick Kennedy knows all about the need to have strict protocols around police-informant relationships. A detective with the New South Wales Police, he also worked for 3 years at the New South Wales Crime Commission, and he knew Standen.
When I was doing that sort of work, I had someone I was accountable to. Where are you going today? You're always being managed. It's clear that Standen wasn't being managed.
Back in Standen's trial, Adam Watt heard evidence about another of the top investigators' registered informants. James Henry Kinch was a key figure in the Dutch drug syndicate. For years, Kinch trafficked more than a tonne of narcotics worth hundreds of millions of dollars into Australia. In 2003, Standen and Kinch began secretly meeting and had become friends.
Kinch is part of an organised crime syndicate that the Crime Commission was set up to bring to its knees. You talk about Bob Trimboli being Mr. Big. Bob Trimboli was a greengrocer who lived in an expensive house. He was nothing compared to Kinch. Kinch was the real deal.
After Kinch was arrested in 2003, Standen interviewed his cleaner. She'd been directed by Kinch to dispose of drugs in his luxury Sydney apartment. The entire case hung on her evidence. She would later make a complaint to the DPP that Standen put undue pressure on her and really came the heavy with her. She claimed he asked if she had family. When she said yes, he then said, "Well, we can make things very difficult for you." Soon after, the woman refused to give evidence against Kinch and fled overseas. So do you think Standen was acting professionally or did he have another motive?
I think he was doing what he'd been doing all his career. This is one of his principal operational strategies, the shutting people down.
Standen lobbied hard for the state prosecutors to drop all charges against Kinch. His intervention saw the drug trafficker leave the country a free man in February 2004. This was after he agreed to forfeit $900,000 to the Commission as proceeds of crime. A fraction of the millions he'd made for the syndicate flooding Sydney streets with drugs. Standen lobbied and negotiated for all charges to be dropped against Kinch. In return, Kinch paid just $900,000 to the Crime Commission. Is that justice?
It doesn't seem that way. It certainly doesn't sound right. I'd have to ask questions about why all the charges were dropped.
Standen recruited Kinch as an informant, and part of the deal was he would provide intel on other criminals bringing drugs into Sydney. Not surprisingly, none of his tips ever led to an arrest of a major drug trafficker.
When Kinch was caught, he didn't have the reputation of becoming an informant. He didn't have that reputation.
Standen and Kinch continued a clandestine relationship.
I've been sitting at Mark Standen's trial now for 80 days. I've heard story after story, evidence after evidence of Mark Standen receiving money, 100,000 here, 100,000 there, 46,000 here.
Mark Standen would tip off James Kinch on what imports were and weren't being looked at. He'd tip off James Kinch on what he was hearing back in terms of intel against the syndicate.
Did Kinch give you money?
Kinch didn't give me any money.
He gave you no money at all?
Not directly, but when he gave Bill Jalilati money, Jalilati gave us money from time to time, which was money that he'd borrowed from Kinch and was supposed to pay back at the rate of 20% interest.
Did you know the money had come from Kinch originally?
After the event, I did. It may be considered a crime that I got money from Jalilati, knowing that it came from Kinch. That could be considered a crime, not one that I was charged with.
There was more money to be made from James Kinch. The Commission was told that 2 years before his arrest, Standen asked his friend, Bill Jalilati, to hide $90 million in cash inside one of his meat exports. The money reportedly belonged to Kinch. Jalilati was to receive a cut, but in the end, the money was never sent. The deal Standen brokered fell through.
Well, that sort of involvement doesn't arise overnight. These are the actions of someone who's organised, someone who it's a massive amount of money. It beggars belief that people who call themselves experts in this area couldn't have suspected that he was up to his neck beforehand. I mean, he was a master manipulator.
Things started to unravel for Standen in early 2006. About this time, Kinch was suspected of 8 importations. Meanwhile, Standen was arranging for Bill Jalilati to meet Kinch overseas and join them in the drug business.
You introduced Kinch, a drug trafficker, to Jalilati. Why would you do that?
Well, there was a good and legitimate reason at the time, and I was reasonably convinced that Kinch wasn't any further involved in criminal enterprises. It's not necessarily the case that once a crook, always a crook, and he was in a position where he could offer some useful advice to Jalilati with a couple of the business plans that he had in mind.
The trio planned to use Jalilati's wholesale food company as a front for their drug imports. In February 2006, Kinch arranged to bankroll this warehouse in Western Sydney and gave Jalilati $1 million.
I think if that sort of money was being handed over to establish a base of some sort, that was seen as something that would be there for the long term, and there'd be more than one shipment coming in. They obviously were planning for the long haul.
So I'm interested this week.
Back in the trial, Adam Watt was hoping Standen would be exposed for doing other imports.
What I'm trying to get from Mark Standen this trial this week is some sort of evidence or some sort of confirmation that he'd been doing exports before. I know I can prove it with other documents, but having it come out of his own mouth would go a long way.
An explosive document we've seen shows just how deep Standen was involved in drug trafficking. It challenges the New South Wales Crime Commission's narrative that Standen had been involved in just one drug import. And it reveals that by 2010, federal authorities believed Standen had been helping to import drugs for years before his arrest. The AFP told the Commission they believe Standen was complicit in previous illegal importations into Australia with Kinch in 2006.
So, looking back on it, it had to be the case that he was involved in a lot more than what he was charged with. And I do think there were probably many other matters that he should have been charged with that didn't get to court.
The AFP believed that you were complicit in multiple imports in 2006 with James Kinch. What do you say to that?
Rubbish. Basically, that's not true. I can't account for why they think that, why they say it.
Do you think the AFP had it in for you?
Not necessarily, but they were unhappy with me, and I think that having been charged with these things, I'm an easy pile-on, a simple out for them on some story, easy to point the finger in the direction of the guy sitting in the dock. I think they realised early on that I'm not fighting back about a lot of things, so I haven't taken people to task about things they've said.
Meanwhile, Adam Watt is learning that not only was Standen cultivating corrupt relationships with his registered informants, but he was also sabotaging investigations into major organised crime.
He regularly tipped off his own syndicate on whether they were being investigated. He leaked information. He diverted intelligence away from his own crew.
He did have access to pretty much all the organised crime investigations and operations in the state of New South Wales, and through the Crime Commission and its connectivity to our federal sphere and internationally, he would have had access carte blanche to pretty much everything that was going on.
Watt started to examine the task forces Standen worked on. He learned that on information supplied by Kinch, that a joint task force was set up to target a UK drug trafficker, James Doyle. Like much of the intel Kinch gave to Standen, it came to nothing because Doyle slipped out of the country only a few days after the task force was set up.
Who do you think might have tipped him off?
Standen.
Why?
Because that's what Standen did. He was a double agent. He wanted favours. He needed all sorts of things, and that's what he did better than anything else.
What happened next is extraordinary. Kinch told Standen and Janine to buy 1,000 litres of acetone for James Doyle. Acetone is often used in the manufacture of drugs like ice and MDMA. It turned out rather than trying to bring down the UK trafficker, Standen was working with him.
What does that say to you? Is that suspicious?
Absolutely.
Well, we know that acetone's used in the production of crystal meth, don't we?
I don't think he had a dry cleaning shop,
Within months of the acetone arriving in 2006, they were told to get rid of it. Janine was recorded more than a year later, still trying to offload the acetone.
I just want to know how you went with the guy with the acetone.
Yes, I got two actually buyers.
I just want it out of there because somebody finds it there. How would I explain myself?
Watt believes the acetone was for a pseudoephedrine import.
In 2006, way before his import was supposed to arrive, way before his import even had supposed to have commenced, he had over 40 drums, 1,000 litres of acetone at the warehouse. The significance being that, A, there was an import due in 2006 at the time my alleged import was meant to arrive.
We can reveal that the Crime Commission believed that Standen had sabotaged another investigation into major criminal figures. This is clear in a statement in 2010 by Standen's superior, John Giorgiuti.
During Operation Gaimea, magazine Comito, there was a leak. Standen suggested to me that the source of the leak was an AFP officer whom he nominated. I believe that the source of the leak was Standen.
Standen was never charged for obstructing major investigations, for protecting those criminals who were the targets, or for falsely accusing his colleagues of corruption.
There's also suggestions that you leaked on multiple task forces and blamed other police officers. What do you say to that?
There were leaks in several jobs that I was involved in, and in most of those cases I was leading the investigation to solve them. I wasn't the leak in those jobs.
What it shows is the contempt Mark Standen had for everyone he worked with. People talk about Mark Standen, would he be prepared to set people up? He set up his own police officers. He framed police officers. Now, if you're prepared to frame police officers, imagine what you're prepared to do to civilians.
Critics say in the wake of Standen's conviction, there has been no public examination of the extent of his criminality. Despite calls for a royal commission, one was never held. Instead, a special commission of inquiry was established in 2011 with a very narrow purview and given only 3 months to report. Inquiry Chief David Patton noted in his report that he was not authorised to look at the 12 years Standen worked for the Commission or his possible involvement in any other criminal activity, corruption or misconduct whilst an officer of the Commission. How could Patton do his job if he couldn't look at Standen's wider criminality and his 12 years at the Commission?
It's difficult to see how that can be justified. You're either looking at someone's activity or you're not. But to put a timeline on it and say you can only look on what happened past a certain date is a recipe for missing out on a whole lot of stuff.
Patton also challenged a claim by Crime Commission boss Philip Bradley that Standen hadn't committed any crime before February 2007. Patton said the evidence would appear to contradict the belief.
Mark Standen didn't just turn corrupt in February 2007. They couldn't have Mark Standen corrupt before that because they didn't have him under surveillance, thereby compromising so many other trials that Mark Standen worked on, and also opening a Pandora's box to other crimes that he was involved in.
Critics say after Standen's arrest there was a failure by multiple government agencies to look thoroughly at his wider criminality. Philip Bradley told Four Corners, at no time did he or others at the Commission withhold information that showed Standen was guilty of other crimes.
G'day, mate. How you going? With yourself? Oh, not bad.
Much of the evidence showing Standen conspiring to import drugs was captured in hundreds of telephone calls and emails intercepted by federal police, as well as meetings recorded through listening devices. The only problem was they weren't under surveillance until May 2007. Prior to that, the Crime Commission has always maintained that Standen was not engaged in any other crime. But as we know, 2006 was a very busy year for Mark Standen. It was the year police believe he was complicit in other drug imports. It was the year he leaked on police operations and protected criminals. It was the year Standen organised for Janine to meet Kinch overseas. It was the year the acetone arrived at their warehouse. And it was the year Kinch reportedly asked Standen for his help to get $90 million out of the country. None of these matters were ever brought to the attention of the Oversight Committee. Should they have been?
Yeah, look, I believe they should have. I would have thought this had a high public interest that it should have been disclosed to the committee.
Four Corners has spoken to the current chair and a former member of the parliamentary committee that oversees the New South Wales Crime Commission.
I think we want to see that these agencies are working well and that we're doing our job as overseeing them.
Phil Donato is also a former police prosecutor.
These are serious matters. Serious matters. There's a high public interest in these matters. We must ensure the level of scrutiny and accountability and transparency in an organisation like the Crime Commission meets community expectations. So if there is evidence to support further criminality that wasn't investigated, well then it should be.
Paul Lynch was on the Oversight Committee for more than a decade and was unaware of Standen's wider corruption.
I think there needs to be a proper investigation of what has happened, and the purpose of that should be to determine how it can be stopped from happening again.
In 2018, the Crime Commission continued the narrative that Standen had committed only one crime. Paul Lynch asked a question in the New South Wales Parliament. 10 years after Mark Standen's arrest, and long after Philip Bradley had retired, the Crime Commission said,
"The New South Wales Crime Commission is not aware of any misconduct or criminal activity involving Mr Standen while he was an employee, other than that dealt with at court."
And why would the Crime Commission mislead the Police Minister and the Parliament?
It is very difficult to find a reason for that. It is impossible to find a good reason for that. One assumes it's about protecting the organisation's reputation.
In recent years, the Crime Commission has new leadership and has undergone major reforms. It's said had these measures been in place when Mark Standen was recruited in 1996, he would not have been offered employment. The Commission said it's unaware of any evidence of Standen's further crimes. Should the New South Wales Crime Commission correct the record now?
Oh, of course it should. If for no other reason than this, the truth is important. The truth should come out.
Standen's legacy lives on. After James Kinch bought his way out of Australia, he was pursued by authorities around the world before being arrested in Thailand.
The truth is, there never is and there never was any drugs.
17 years on, the AFP is still trying to seize some of Kinch's wealth, including his house in Portugal. And we've been told by an underworld figure that James Kinch was recently seen in Bangkok with Australian drug dealers.
These events aren't old. They're recent enough so that the international drug suppliers that Standen facilitated, they're still operative today. And these crime rings, which he opened, are still in place. We should look at all of this, look at it carefully. Why? Because we may be able to unpick those crime rings.
One thing's for sure, if we don't fix the system up, if we don't open our eyes and are honest about what has gone wrong, then it may be something that'll happen again.
As a fighter, when you lose a fight, you get an opportunity to look at that fight and see what you did wrong. See what you did wrong and become a better person, become a better fighter. Where the New South Wales Crime Commission had that opportunity, but they didn't. By suppressing the truth, all they're doing is setting a benchmark for the next Mark Standen to come along.